Today I titled the sermon Home. Last week, Pastor Steve talked about a miracle with Elijah and trying to draw the Israelites back. And this time of year, we talk about people coming back home, visiting for the holidays. And so that evokes a different type of feeling, different situation, different circumstances when you think of coming home this time of year. But we're talking about being home, not just our home where we grew up or our home with our family, but talking about being home in terms of our relationship with God. Are our hearts in the right place in terms of being with God? Are we home with God? So we're picking up in our story today. This is from Luke 15. It's a popular story. Thousands of sermons have been preached about this topic. It's the story of the prodigal son. So in our story today, we're dealing with a home situation. A father and two sons are the main characters in our story. So we're going to be just taking a look at it. I didn't put a specific focus. Sometimes there are sermons like where the focus is on the younger son, or the focus is on the older son, or the focus is on the father. We're just going to try to go through the story and pick out some things from it that hopefully still apply to our lives today. So we're jumping in. This is Luke 15, verses 11 and 12. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Now, at first glance, this doesn't sound like a big deal. Like, hey, give me what's going to be coming to me anyway. But at that time and in that culture, if a younger son or a son in general went and asked the father for his share of the estate, it was basically saying, I wish you were dead so I could have what was mine. And from what I was reading, the typical response in that type of situation would be discipline. Like you go and say to your dad, I wish you were dead so I could have all your money, smack upside the head, or whatever they did in Middle Eastern culture. That was the typical response if a kid came to you and said that. This was the younger son, and so he would have been entitled to 1/3 of what the father owned. So he's saying, can I have 1/3? You're not dead yet, but can I have it? Let's see how the father responds. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. So the father, if we pause, the father divided, gave the son what he asked for, didn't discipline him, and now we're seeing how the son reacts. And it says, he set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. There's a lot packed into those little verses, because we can envision that now, someone getting a bunch of money and going off and just blowing the money somewhere in wild living. They actually wouldn't even need to travel to go and spend a bunch of money in wild living, but that's what this son did. And that was looked down upon at the time, like not being where your family was. So he goes off, wastes all the money he had asked his father for. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. We don't really struggle with famines here in our country. We are a blessed people. In our church body, we are blessed people. We aren't struggling and wondering where our food is going to come from, or if a drought happens, it's not personally affecting us. But it was a big deal in that time. There was a famine, a severe famine in that whole country, and he began to be in need. So the son who had taken his inheritance, gone out and spent it on wild living, no longer living with his family, he's now in need. He had no one that was taking care of him. Sometimes when we're thinking about this glamorous life or going off and spending it all, we envision it we're with other people. Rarely do we envision someone going off and spending all their money and no one is around. It's like we see more like they're probably going out and partying with a whole bunch of people, and there's people everywhere, and they're spending all their money. Well, this guy is beginning to be in need. So if he was with anyone, there was no one helping him. So what seemed so glamorous, now he's really in a tough spot. He began to be in need. We move on to verses 15 and 16. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So he was really alone. The guy is hungry. No one's even offering to give him food. What seemed so glamorous and like such a good idea, I'm going to take my money, I'm going to go squander it. He probably didn't actually think he was going to squander it per se, but I'm going to go spend it. I'm going to go live this great life. And now all of a sudden, he's in such a low place that he has no one even offering him anything. He hired himself out, it says, to feed pigs. We read that and it doesn't really mean much to us because, well, yes, pigs are an animal from a farm. That makes sense. But in Jewish culture, pigs were an unclean animal. So they would have been looked at like, you are feeding one of the scummiest things God made. It's going and doing the low of the low when you're taking care of the pigs. So not only has he been hungry, no one is around, no one is helping him, no one's offering him anything, he's also doing a really low job. So his good life that he had, not so good anymore. No one gave him anything. Now we're in verses 17 through 20. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am starving to death." So if we pause right there, he's beginning to look back and think about home, the place he left, the place where he took his inheritance, ran from, trying to live whatever, the good life, or so he thought. And now when times are tough and the going gets hard, he remembers where he came from. And I think that's a very natural human response. We remember where we came from at different points in our lives. He remembers where he came from. They have food to spare. The servants have food to spare. And here I am starving, longing to eat what this unclean animal is eating. Here I am. I could be so much better off where I was before if I was home. So he says, "I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." So here he is, remembering what it was like when he was home and deciding, I'm going back. Now remember, when he asked his dad for his inheritance, culturally, that was really rude. That was bad. So his father, who could have disciplined him, his father chose to give him his inheritance, chose to let him go. And now the son realizes that that was a mistake. And he says, I'm going to go back and say, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you." Now, heaven was a word that could be used in place of God, like I've sinned against God and I've sinned against you. So he realizes that he made a mistake by going out and squandering his living. Not only was he sinning in not honoring his dad, but not honoring in his relationship with God. "I am no longer worthy to be called your son." When we read this story, the sons, and we've only really heard about the one so far, they represent us. Have we been in a point where we are saying, I am no longer worthy to be called your son or your daughter? I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he's thinking, there's no way my dad is I don't deserve to be his son, but if I could at least just be a servant, my life would be better than where I am now, starving and feeding pigs. So he has this plan all set out, what he's going to say to his dad when he gets back home. So he starts traveling home. It says, so he got up and went to his father. Now we're in Luke 15:20. It says, but while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. I find this interesting. Now we have cell phones and lots of stuff where we could potentially know where people are. But while he was still a long way off, his dad sees him. So it's like his dad was hoping one day his son would be coming back. His dad had this hope in his heart. I know he left. I know he took the inheritance. It's kind of like he's dead to me, or at least that could have been a natural response. But the father sees him while he was still a long way off. And it says, and he was filled with compassion for him, and he ran to his son. Once again, it is not uncommon in our culture for fathers to run. Fathers play sports, they play catch, they do things with their kids that involves running. But in Jewish culture, this was not normal. When Jesus tells this story and is saying he ran to his son, they wore like long stuff. So in order to run, you had to like pull up your clothes to be able to run so you didn't trip. It's the equivalent, from what I read, it's the equivalent of saying, because like the legs were exposed and the guy's running, it's the equivalent of saying the guy ran down the street in only his underwear. That would be undignified in our culture. It would be like looking out your window, what's that guy doing? That's a little weird. It's not something that the average person, average father, goes out and does. But while his son was still a far way off, he hikes up his robes and starts running. He doesn't care that it's undignified. He just cares that he sees his son. It says he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. If we are the son, and we know that we are unworthy to be called sons and daughters of God, and if the Father is God, and he runs to us, God sent Jesus for us. That is not normal either. Where the great King of Kings sends his son to die in our place, that's not normal. No other God does that. There's no other religion that teaches you are so unworthy, and yet I'm doing something about it. That's what our God says. Our God comes running to us. And this time of year, we remember that because Christmas is about God taking on human form, starting the road to Calvary. I mean, it started way back with Adam and Eve, but with Jesus coming in the human body, God is running to us, throws his arms around him, and kissed him. So my question for us today is, are we home? We are unworthy to be called sons and daughters of God, but are we home? Are we heading to God? Are we letting him wrap his arms around us? The son said to him, so we're continuing on, verse 21, the son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. So the son somehow gets the words out when his dad is wrapping his arms around him. His dad is overjoyed that his son is back. The son gets out the words that he wanted to say. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. And we keep going in verse 22. This verse just says, but the father said to his servants. It's like the dad hears his son, and he knows what the son is feeling. As parents, when our kids come to us, we know what they're feeling a lot of the times, and they don't even have to say the words. The father knows that his son is sorry, and the son said it, but the father knows, and it says, the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. So the dad could have had one of those I told you so moments. Like, was it really worth it to take all the money and squander it away? Aren't you glad to be back home with me where it's safe? The father could have said any of those things to kind of drive home the point, but the father knew how the son's heart was, and the son's heart was softened, and our God is like that. He never tries to condemn us to the point where we're like ground down, unable to even move. Our God is loving, and our God draws us to himself. Our God runs after us. Put a ring on his finger. Culturally, that would have been like a family ring to be like, he's still part of our family. I know he basically slapped me in the face, took all the money, wished I was dead, but I'm not thinking about any of that. Put a robe on him. Sandals on his feet. Sandals were a big deal. He wants him to have special treatment. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. So fattened calf was that. It was a calf that they were trying to make nice and juicy and fat so they could eat it and it would taste really good. So they have this calf, and you take a while to get the thing ready. So it was a big deal. It wasn't like they had many fattened calves laying around. He's like, hey, just grab one of those off the shelf. This was the special one that they had been saving and preparing. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. Our God will come running. When we turn to him, he is there. Christmas starts it all with Jesus coming, leading up to dying for us at Calvary. Let's have a feast and celebrate. We never get to a place where God doesn't want us back. I don't know what our stories are or where we are today, but there is no place where God is not going to come running, kill the fattened calf, and celebrate that we are back and that we are with him. So are our hearts home with God today? Are we home in that love that no matter what, our God's going to run undignified and meet us there? Verse 24, for this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. There is so much power packed in those verses. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. People probably never expected to see that son ever again. It would be ridiculously embarrassing to come back after you had said to your father, I wish you were dead, give me my money, I'm out of here. But the fact that the father was watching and saw him from a far way off, God does not give up hope. Like we as humans, we give up hope pretty easily. But God doesn't. While he was far off, the father went running to him. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. This is a big deal. If you or we are here today in this role as this younger son, the prodigal son, God is ready. God is waiting. God has been watching. God wants to celebrate us coming home. But now we're going to talk about the older son. Maybe we aren't necessarily the prodigal son. We haven't run away. We haven't squandered. Maybe we've just been serving God faithfully. Let's take a look at this older son. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field. When he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. Your brother has come, he replied, and your father has killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. I think this is a little bit hard to imagine because this isn't how our homes are set up. Like in our homes, if someone came back who hadn't been there for a while, I feel like the news would have spread pretty fast and everyone would know. But the way it was and how they worked in fields, etc., the older son didn't know that his brother was back. They had time to get the robe, get the ring, get the sandals, kill the calf, and start a party before the older son even knows what's going on. So he has to ask a servant, what is going on? And the servant gives a pretty accurate description. Your brother has come. Your father killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. In human terms, we want to think that if our brother had run off and did this and then came back home, that we would be, yes, my brother's back. I never thought I would see him again. This is a great day. I'm so glad Dad killed the fattened calf. I can't wait to go celebrate too. We like to think that that would be the response. But if you have a sibling, and you know sometimes how siblings interact, we're going to see what happens. This really doesn't seem that far from how we probably might respond too. Verse 28, the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. The older brother became angry. Have you ever gotten angry about something your sibling did and then how your parents reacted afterwards? Like the punishment wasn't hard enough? Like, are you kidding me? If I would have done that, they would have whatever. So it's not that unbelievable that the older brother became angry and refused to go in. However, in that culture, refusing to go in was a big deal. It kind of makes sense to us, like, well, yeah, he doesn't want to go in, he's mad. But it was basically saying, like, I don't want any part of this. And the fact that the father had to leave the house and come out and talk to the older brother, that's where culturally that was huge. Like, everyone would have known that there's drama going down in this family, because the father has to step away from the party and go outside and talk to the older brother. So it would have caused an embarrassment for the family. But the father still goes out and pleads with him. The father could have said, are you kidding me? You're the oldest. I expect more from you. The father went out and pleaded with him. Let's see what he says. Verse 29. So this is the son. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. From the human side, this seems to make sense. Are you kidding me? The younger brother went out and acted like just squandered everything, basically slapped you in the face, ruined everything good, and now you're having a party for him. And yet here I am, I've done everything you've ever wanted, and you don't even let me kill a measly goat. In human terms, that makes perfect sense. But this story isn't just an earthly father and an earthly son. This story is our heavenly Father, and the story is us. Sometimes if we've been serving God for a long time, we can get a misplaced view of grace. That God's grace is dependent on how much we do for him. Like, you didn't even give me a goat, and yet I obey you and do everything you want. That's not how God's grace works. We could have a goat every day. You never even gave me. I've never disobeyed you. The son is clearly mad. Verse 30. The son is still talking. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. He doesn't even say my brother. When my brother comes home, he says this son of yours. He's really upset. He is mad about the grace of the Father. Sometimes I think we can get there too. As sad and as embarrassing as it could seem, do we ever, when something good happens to someone who in our minds doesn't deserve it, where is our natural inclination? Oh yes, God is great, I'm so glad that happened. Or is our natural inclination, are you kidding me? I've done this and this and this. Why didn't that happen to me? And that's what the son is dealing with. The normal human emotions that can lead us down a dark path into a sinful jealousy, into a sinful judgmental attitude. Verse 31, the father says, my son, You are always with me, and everything I have is yours. When we become children of God, we are always with God, and all of the good things of God are always ours. Are we tapping into all that? Because that's where we should be. We shouldn't be just slaving away, as that brother said, and not having the fulfilled life of being home in our relationship with God, where we have access to all the good stuff God has for us. Are we just slaving away and building up resentment, and then something good happens to someone else and we wonder, why not me? He says, you are always with me and everything I have is yours. Do we really believe that? Verse 32, but we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. He is reminding the brother what we need to be reminded of as Christians. We're still about people getting saved. We're still about people coming back, coming to God. That's where we are. We can be working and serving God, and we should be. But we cannot lose sight of what is most important. We should be rejoicing. We should be glad. We should be seeing people coming to God and getting saved so we can kill the fattened calf, so we can celebrate. The older brother was so busy working and doing stuff that lost sight of this most important thing. He was dead and is alive. He came back. We cannot forget that. We cannot forget what is most important. So my question for us is, are we home? Are we home with God? Are we home with God? Are we the prodigal, as he has been called from that time on, reading the story? Are we the prodigal who needs to come home to the Father, where we know I am not worthy to be called your son or your daughter? Are we the older son, so busy working that we don't truly understand what God's grace is? That we've forgotten that we're in the business of leading people to Jesus, that is still the most important thing, that is the reason for this season.